Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm Saikin and today I'll be reading The Villain's White Halo or Fan Pai by Hua Guāng Huán by Hao Dayi Jianwei Sheng Zhi. Chapters 10 through 13. As a reminder, this series is rated mature, so please check the description for a link to the content warnings. In this video, I've chosen to make one slide with all the relevant information on it. In order to facilitate this, I've shortened the explanations for anything that is a common word or phrase that has shown up several times already, and I've used a more to-the-point description for the notes and footnotes to save space. If you want more information on anything that's mentioned, feel free to ask in a comment or do independent research on the topic. There are several interesting things mentioned in this one that I just couldn't fit in-depth explanations of. Alright, let's get to the story. Chapter 10. The next day, Yin Biyue couldn't make the meeting after all. A green finch bearing a letter had landed outside his courtyard early in the morning. The letter was written in proper Taiga script using the deep-water ink of Hui Prefecture upon thin cloud paper. Even its wording was formal. The Lan Yan Academy invites Your Excellency for a visit. We eagerly await your arrival. Sincerely, Headmaster Shēng. Though exquisite, an invitation of such caliber could be composed by any prominent clan. The difference was the stamp at the end of the letter. It wasn't the Academy's emblem of a brush entwined with a flower signifying literary excellence, but the stamp of the headmaster's personal seal. Lan Yan Academy stood as a neutral power among the One Mountains and three Taoist sects, the twin Buddhist temples, and the demonic 12 palaces. However, the Academy's shadow influenced all of them. The current leader of Bao Pu sect had once studied at the Academy. The abbot of Jiekong Temple had once taught there. In fact, many of the pillars of major sects were former students of the school. Even a number of prominent officials in the court of the northern imperial capital were graduates of Lan Yuan Academy. But most importantly, the Academy's headmaster was one of the 6 second sages of the world. To have such a titan personally stamp an invitation was extraordinary indeed. Duan Chongshan clicked his tongue in amazement as he examined the letter. Such spiritual ability, as expected of a second sage. Shishang, do you think the array cast in this letter can transport 2 people? Why don't we bind ourselves as one and go together? Yin Biyue struggled to keep his mouth straight. Are you stupid? No way. Taking a tag-along when teleporting? You'd be ripped apart in a heartbeat. He took the invitation back and studied its contents. Though the wording appeared polite, there was no indication of a meeting time. The meaning was clear. Depart immediately upon receipt. One of the cultivation world's crude sayings came to Yin Biyue's mind. The Sangya Mountain's tyranny is the real deal. I'll beat you till you submit. I'm reason itself. But Lan Yuan Academy's obstinance is just as real. Their pleases and thank yous are fists. Yin Biyue rubbed the palm-sized stamp with his thumb. The red ink was slightly raised, its texture smooth and delicate to the touch. The seal itself was generically engraved with the words, Personal Seal of Headmaster Shēng. Then Chongshan watched beside him, worried that he would disappear at any moment. The headmaster's stamp contained an array that opened a spatial passageway upon injection of vital qi. Lan Yuan Academy was located in Yunyang City of the Central Continent, while the Zangya Mountains were in the Western Continent. More than 1,000 miles existed between them, but with the array, travel would be instantaneous. Yin Biyue couldn't think of why a titan like a second sage would want to see him. The inane reason Duan Chongshan produced that the headmaster would request he deliver a lecture at the academy because he graduated with top marks sounded impossible. In the 3 years he had studied at the academy, he hadn't even known where the headmaster lived. The deputy headmaster and the teachers had handled all academy affairs, whether big or small. Headmaster Shēng seemed like a legendary existence. Well, no point in dwelling on things he didn't understand. He had to meet with the man regardless. He nodded curtly. I'm off, Shiji. Duan Chongshan pressed close. Shishang, you really won't consider bringing me along? Hey, Shishang, Shishang? His cries were still echoing in Yin Biyue's ears when, in a flash, he found himself in a foreign land. Shallow puddles pooled around the blue tiles on the ground, and the air was cool and damp. The sky was clearing. Rain had just passed through Yunyang City. Yin Biyue glanced down at his own shadow to determine the time difference between the two continents. He was standing within the vermilion gate of the academy. Before him was a gigantic establishment stone that resembled a spiritual Ling Zhi and exuded an air of magnificence. Beside the stone stood a red-robed young boy with hair tied in two loops. At the sight of Yin Biyue's appearance, he cupped his hands in a salute. "Please come with me, Shēng. Shēng is waiting for you." Rather than a residence, the academy could be considered a city within a city, mainly because of its sheer size. Circling past the establishment stone was the grand main avenue of the academy. It extended far into the distance, leading to the Hall of Diligence, where the students gathered. The avenue and the main hall were empty, as it was school hours and the students were in their respective classrooms. Beyond the Hall of Diligence, the path diverged into complex, smaller routes. Some were winding corridors that wrapped around the academy's main buildings, while others were long, blue-tiled roads branching off in every direction. Yin Biyue walked down the road that the OG had traversed countless times. Massive black locust trees, their trunks as wide as 3 men, canopied the paths. Green vines sprawled across the walls of the 4-story library. Everywhere Yin Biyue looked, he saw vibrant green. The corridors connecting the classrooms were lined with weathered red pillars, their surfaces mottled, and the flecks of peeling paint revealed darker hues beneath. The breeze sweeping across the academy carried the refreshing fragrance of greenery and the sonorous voices of students reciting their texts. The scenery here was both familiar and foreign. What did Lan Yuan Academy teach? Everything, from calligraphy, painting, and mathematics to prose, lyrics, and musical scores. Not to mention introduction to cultivation, hundreds of schools of thought, the beginning of the universe, and political mind games. Headmaster Shēng once said, "The pursuit of each path has its sequence, but one does not hold superiority over another. Of the 3,000 paths in the universe, all lead to the same destination." This was the guiding creed of the academy. The boy led Yin Biyue through another archway and smiled. "It's been a few years since you've graduated, Shēng. Do you still remember the way around here?" "Of course. I walked these paths thousands of times. But even though I was a student here, I'm ashamed to admit I do not know Shēng's name." He assumed that the boy was the headmaster's servant and could therefore supply him with the headmaster's surname. That way, he could address the headmaster properly when they met. "No one really knows Shēng's name," the boy said. "I imagine he doesn't remember it himself." Yin Biyue blinked in surprise. Just as the world dares not speak the sword sage's name, has Shēng really forgotten his own name with the passage of time? The boy puffed up his chubby cheeks and pursed his lips, looking conflicted. He seemed innocent and spirited. It was apparent the headmaster treated those around him with gentleness, at least on the surface. "Not exactly," the boy said. "Shēng is someone very senior, so everyone in the world, no matter how distinguished, has to address him that way. At the same time, he's generous, so no matter how poor or lowly they are, he allows everyone to address him that way." Eventually, his name was no longer important. To Shēng, the common people are all equal. The common people were all equal? A faint smile surfaced on Yin Biyue's face. Now those sounded like the words of a true sage. To him, they were mere ants beneath his feet. Each ant was equally small from his vantage point. With an expression as calm as still water, he followed the boy to circle around the library and headed deeper into the quiet and secluded depths of the school. He was one step behind the boy, but when they rounded a corner, the boy vanished. Yin Biyue continued his confident stride forward, however, and did not panic. This entire school was the headmaster's personal domain. Here, the movement of every petal and leaf, every bird and beast, was within his grasp. Nothing could escape his notice here, not even Yin Biyue losing his way. He walked past the martial arts training hall, where young men practiced their sword with singular focus. Though youthful in appearance, their eyes were resolute. Beads of sweat trickled down their foreheads and rolled down their collars. He paused outside the hall of debate. Two groups of students inside were locked in a debate stalemate, their faces flushed red all the way down to their necks as they glared at each other. He watched the students hurrying to and fro inside the library, their figures a blur through the windows. Their arms were stacked with books and scrolls, and their strides steady and confident. Ah, students in the prime of their youth. He recalled two particular courses, debate and introduction to the art of the sword. Their teachers had been famously strict. When he first entered the school, others whispered, "He's so young, can he manage to graduate?" Then they watched helplessly as he claimed the top spot in both courses. He had spent many nights studying, many mornings rising early to practice the sword, and many evenings climbing the high towers to watch the sun set. Yin Biyue had never been the most gifted, but he had been more diligent than any prodigy. Memories flooded his mind as scenes of the past flashed before his eyes. His life had felt like a long dream, within which he lived through 3 years of joy, anger, and sorrow at the academy. Every day spent in this establishment was engraved on his soul, from the first entrance exam he had nervously taken in the Hall of Learning, to the wanton singing and drinking of his farewell night upon Orchid Terrace. The images stopped at the present, where he was Yin Biyue, and Yin Biyue was him. The events of yesterday shaped the me of today. The longsword resonated as the thought stirred in his mind. The blue-tiled floor beneath his feet split into a foot-long chasm of profound depth, standing stark against the backdrop of a sky dyed the color of blood by the fading sun. At the same time, under the locust tree, in a secluded yard, a middle-aged scholar in a tall hat and broad belt flashed a smile. Qi released before the sword unsheathed. Excellent. An entire yard of locust flowers quivered in the breeze in response to his pleasure. Yin Biyue had been immersed in the sword intent, a mystical feeling that was almost close to instinct, when the scenery before him changed into a yard full of locust trees. Though it was only mid-spring, the trees were in full bloom, their sweet fragrance wafting through the air. Standing beneath one of the locust trees was a singular figure, the master of the academy. Before his meeting with headmaster Shēng, Yin Biyue had imagined what kind of person he'd be many times. Most people would be curious about what those who stood at the apex of the world looked like, or what power they emanated. But what he'd pictured couldn't compare with what he witnessed now. He had assumed the headmaster to be an otherworldly, immortal elder. He certainly hadn't expected a middle-aged scholar. The man stood beneath the locust tree with his hands loosely clasped behind him, like an idle rich man from a prominent house. Even when dressed in the formal attire of a tall hat and a broad belt, he seemed a little laid back. He did not exude authority as the sect leader did, nor did he possess the glaring sword intent of Jin Yu, or the cutting aura of the martial artist found on Liu Qishuang. Nonetheless, Yin Biyue didn't dare lower his guard. He had a keen intuition for sensing the strength of a soul, and the man before him was formidably strong. In all of Yin Biyue's experience assessing others, this man was a rare powerhouse. Yin Biyue took 2 steps forward and stopped at a respectful distance before he bowed, maintaining a disciple's etiquette. This student greets Shēng. The idle rich man waved, indicating that formalities weren't necessary. What he said in the next second heightened Yin Biyue's alarm to the extreme. He felt his blood freeze, as if he'd plunged into an icy cellar. The man sighed, a little rueful, then grinned. Don't worry about not being able to kill him. Chapter 11. Yin Biyue had to summon every ounce of willpower to keep his expression neutral. He dropped his head respectfully, like any pupil receiving guidance. He had to stay as placid as a lake. Even the smallest change that exposed his racing thoughts would not escape Shēng's eyes. The him Shēng spoke of obviously meant Luo Mingchen. So it had been Headmaster Shēng who'd ordered Yin Biyue to kill? Why did he want Luo Mingchen dead? Hadn't Luo Mingchen also studied at the academy? With his cultivation level, Shēng had 100 ways to kill Luo Mingchen. Why use Yin Biyue? To compel a second sage to plot secretly? Was the ultimate target Luo Mingchen? Or was it the Zangya sect? But the academy had been neutral for years, not to mention it had a strong friendship with Zangya. Furthermore, the sword sage and Shēng were good friends. Could it be that there was something unique about Luo? When was the order issued? After Yin Biyue first entered the academy, or when he joined the sword sage? Did the sword sage know? Yin Biyue felt like an insignificant pawn in the hands of titans. If this had happened to anyone else, they'd be seized by terror. But when Yin Biyue came to his senses, his mind was filled with practical questions. Hey, what about my promised final boss arc? Why is there a stronger boss above me? Who put this giant mountain in the villain's camp? What do I do now? As I suspected, leveling up is the only way to the top. We shall let this matter go for now. Do not trouble yourself with it in the future. Shēng said. He pointed at the rattan chair beside him. Come, have a seat. At least Yin Biyue didn't need to think about killing Luo Mingchen for the time being. He politely took a seat. This segment of his memories was blank, but judging by the current situation, his past interactions with Shēng had been relatively peaceful. Shēng sat down in one of the rattan chairs as well. A few locust blossoms had alighted upon the stone table before them, landing beside a slightly worn black-glazed tea set. You've come just in time to join me in stargazing. It had been early morning when Yin Biyue first arrived, but when he entered this mysterious realm, it was dusk. Now, the dregs of daylight were fading. In about a cup of tea's time, the first stars would be visible in the night sky. Indeed, everything was within Shēng's control. First, water was brought to a boil, and the vessels were heated. Next, the tea cake was carefully broken apart, and the leaves sprinkled into the pot. Once the steaming water was added, and the tea poured, Shēng swirled each cup. Waves of pristine, pale liquid swished against the glazed black walls of the vessels, their contrasting colors blending rather than clashing. Shēng moved with fluid, careful grace, yet he was methodical and precise in his actions. This was probably what Confucius meant by following one's heart's desires without overstepping the universe's boundaries. Yin Biyue watched attentively. How many people in the world would dare to imagine being served tea brewed by the headmaster? I got it for free, so I guess this is the benefit of working for a big shot, he thought to himself with amusement. Wordlessly, they sat beneath the locust tree, enjoying the taste of the tea. The situation wasn't developing as he had first expected. The residual reaction of the OG's body didn't raise his hackles against Shēng. Before Yin Biyue realized it, his agitated heart had calmed and his distracting conjectures dispersed. For the first time since coming to this world, his taut nerves relaxed amid the fragrance of tea. He picked up his cup and swirled it in his hand. The faint shimmer of stars was reflected within. Shēng closed his eyes in pleasure, finished his cup, then gazed up toward the sky. Thick clouds had drifted across the moon, obscuring its glow, which only served to heighten the brilliance of the stars. You must know, stars do not move as slowly as our eyes perceive, Shēng said, with a twinkle in his eye. Some are very fast. Yin Biyue was taken aback. He glanced up again, only to see the same tapestry of silent stars. This was when he knew they were not seeing the same thing. He couldn't fathom how the world appeared through a second sage's eyes any more than a mayfly knew the size of the world or a summer grub the chill of ice. In all that he'd lived through, he'd never peered across billions of miles to behold the universe and the orbit of stars. Shifting to a more comfortable position in his chair, Shēng watched with great relish. Soon after, he once again shattered Yin Biyue's breadth of understanding. The golden-necked dragon and winged fire serpent were 3 Ganges Sen Zhang apart last year, he said with a deep sigh. They should be aligning about now. Golden-necked dragon and winged fire serpent were constellation names, one in the east and one in the south. Ganges Sen was a unit of measurement in Buddhism, approximating 10 to the power of 52. Squinting, Shēng murmured under his breath, his eyes fixed on the sky. Yin Biyue could just barely catch fragments of colossal numerical units, like jian, ji, na you ta. As if connecting 2 dots together, Shēng lifted a finger and swept it across the sky. A sage's divination. It wasn't a matter of mystical perception of spiritual sense, but real calculations. Drawing from their immense reservoir of knowledge, their unique computational methods, and their terrifying capacity for reckoning, they would arrive at their outcome after dedicating an extended period to measurements and logic. Yin Biyue was profoundly shaken. To learn fate through observation of the stars? What did Shēng see? The man in question set down his teacup and smiled faintly. It is time for you to leave Cangya. Southward is best. The pot of tea was done. The night breeze picked up, stirring the faint sweetness of the lingering tea fragrance and locust blossoms in the air as it dispersed the thick clouds in the sky. The bright moon emerged, breaking free of its cover. Silvery white light beamed down and spilled across the mortal earth from the distant heavens. At the same time, the brilliant stars dimmed. There were a few so small in size that Yin Biyue could no longer see them. As the shimmering stars faded when the moon rose, so did the smile on Shēng's face retreat behind the thin folds around his eyes. He began to clean up the tea set. Tonight's stargazing session had come to an end. Yin Biyue rose to his feet and dusted away the locust petals gathered on his robes. He cupped his hands in a salute, performing a disciple's courtesy one more time as a farewell. Leaning against his rattan chair, Shēng nodded. Yin Biyue fished out the invitation from his sleeves and activated the array. His form rippled like water before vanishing from the small yard, leaving a sole figure behind. Even with the radiant moon as company, he seemed somewhat lonely. The scholar gazed back at the solitary night sky. "You must know," he murmured to himself, his expression shrouded, "the moon is also a star." Except the star was too bright, and none dared to challenge its radiance. A sigh seemed to echo through the empty halls of the academy. Yin Biyue landed back in his own courtyard on Xihua Peak, the same spot he had left that morning. The invitation in his hand crumbled into dust and dissipated into the night. The Academy one-day travel pass really is single-use, he thought, looking down at his hand ruefully. Here, I thought I might have a spiritual device that allowed me to travel to the Academy at will. Who knows when I'll reach that cultivation level? To fabricate a device that allowed others to traverse a space of countless miles was no small feat. Yin Biyue didn't notice that what he'd wondered was when he would attain the state of Second Sage, not if he could attain it. Among 100 cultivators in the spirit concentration state, maybe 40 of them would think about how to attain the breakthrough state. 20 of them would think about when they would attain small ascension, and of them, 5 would try to picture what great ascension was like. But almost no one would attempt to contemplate the cultivation of a sage. He didn't dwell on any of that. The present him believed it was enough to train diligently. There was no need to ask questions. It was a subconscious confidence he possessed. He wouldn't waste his time on self-doubt or erode his resolve with unnecessary rumination. He gripped the hilt of his sword and lifted his gaze to the sky. Without the cover of Yunyang City's towering structures, the moon above Cangya Mountains seemed even brighter and clearer. He could hear the rustling leaves of the sea of deciduous trees mingling with the murmurs of the rolling waves of conifers. Every now and then, the cry of a partridge would break through the stillness, deepening the emptiness that enveloped the night. He couldn't unleash the sharp sword intent that boiled within his sheathed sword the way he had during the day at the academy. That was a stroke of luck, a fleeting feeling his mind attained. Still, it greatly inspired him. He stood in the yard through the night. By the time dawn broke, morning dew had soaked him entirely, yet his eyes shone brighter and brighter. He had found the way to wield his sword. Chapter 12. Although Yin Biyue hadn't slept, he was energetic at the meeting the next day. He stood straight and steadfast with vivid, lucid eyes. Liu Qishuang was glad to see him in such good health. It seems Shiji is feeling better. Thank you for your care, Shiji, Yin Biyue said with a nod. He next turned to Juan Yu and Duan Chongshuan. Thank you, Da Shixiang, Wu Shiji. His gratitude was for the dungeon visit and the protection they gave during the public trial. Although Liu Qishuang and Duan Chongshuan's assistance had spiraled in the wrong direction, it had worked out. Seeing the earnest look in Yin Biyue's eyes, Liu Qishuang felt a twinge of guilt. She hadn't done her duty as a shijie in the past, and she hadn't been much help this time either. In spite of this, even after all the hurt, Yin Biyue still thanked them. He truly had an excellent temperament. The meeting took place in Juan Yu's first courtyard, with the tables, chairs, and benches provided by Duan Chongshun as usual. After extending his gratitude to his peers, Yin Biyue turned his eyes on Juan Yu, knowing that his elder Shi Xiang must have something to say. Juan Yu exuded a frigid aura as he sat with his back as straight as a brush, as if he might unsheath his sword at a moment's notice. Gazing at his two shiji, he said, "In 3 months, Mount Chongmyung's flower-plucking tournament will occur. You two shall go." His voice sounded raw and stiff, probably because he didn't speak often. The thousand-leaf lotus of Ming Lake is known to dispel worries and troubles of the heart, Liu Qi Shuang added. It has also come time for the two of you to travel beyond the peak. Yin Biyue abruptly recalled Headmaster Xiansheng telling him to travel south. Mount Changming was in the southern continent. This was fast. The flower to be plucked in the flower-plucking tournament was the thousand-leaf lotus in Ming Lake of Mount Changming. Over 100 hectares of the lake's surface were canopied by lotus leaves, but there was only one lotus flower that bloomed every 10 years. In a cultivator's long lifespan, 10 years wasn't much, but no one wanted to wait. Because the thousand-leaf lotus drew on the natural spiritual energy abundant on Mount Changming, in addition to dispelling troubles of the mind and heart, it could also purify the physical constitution and improve cultivation aptitude, laying a solid foundation for an individual's cultivation path. To cultivators of the small ascension level and below, there was no better treasure. The strongest would speak with their strength, climbing to the summit and plucking the flower. This was how Mount Changmyung's flower-plucking tournament gained its name. After consultation between the various sects, in order to encourage the younger generation, it had been decided that anyone below the state of small ascension and above the state of breakthrough could participate. Once one was past the small ascension state, the flower was of little value, and those below the state of breakthrough could not fully absorb the flower's spiritual energy. Alternately hosted by the One Mountain and 3 Taoist sects and the twin Buddhist temples, the tournament had developed into a massive competition where the young measured their strength. Countless astounding talents traveled thousands of miles to attend this event, not only for the thousand-leaf lotus, but also to make a name for themselves. The tournament was also an opportunity for the major sects to boost their prestige, affirm their status, and test each other. Zhang Ya attended the tournament every time, though Xihua Peak had never participated. Jun Yu had made the decision to attend in this instance because of Yin Biyue's white hair affliction. Liu Qishuang also thought that participation at the flower-plucking tournament of Mount Chongming was an excellent choice, whether they found a cure or gained experience through their travels. None of the sword sage's older disciples, Jin Yu, Liu Qishuang, and Yin Xing, had attended this grand competition, organized specifically for young talents. That might have sounded rather unbelievable, but the reasons were simple. Jin Yu was the sword sage's chief disciple, but the flower-plucking tournament hadn't existed when he first made a name for himself. Later, when he emerged from the peak to travel the world, he'd already attained the small ascension state. Not to mention, he only traveled to the most dangerous and remote places, like the mighty mountains, savage swamps, or the snow plains of the northwest. Very few people had actually seen him during his journey. Liu Qishuang had originally intended to go to Mount Changming, not to pluck any flowers, but to seek a worthy opponent to sharpen her skills. However, the year she emerged from the peak, she'd run into the revival of Qiang Palace of the 12 palaces of the demonic dominion. Thus, she joined the sect leader and many of the sect elders and charged up the Xiying Mountains to vanquish evil. Many of those at the small ascension state perished in the battle, yet Liu Qishuang, who was at the spirit concentration state at the time, managed to survive. She missed the flower-plucking tournament, but she found her match in the battle with the demonic cultivators and therefore had no regrets. As for the year Yan Xing emerged from the mountain, he'd made the trip to Mount Chongming. He tried a few of the pre-challenges, but none at the scene were a match for him. Finding it dull, he galloped away with his Chang Dao brandished, never to be seen again. In spite of all these tales, whether it was Jun Yu's cross-level kills, Liu Qishuang's battle of Xiliang Mountains, or Yin Xing's overnight breakthrough, most had only heard of them rather than witnessed them with their own eyes. This time, should Yin Biyue and Duan Chongming participate, they would not only be representing Sanya, they would be representing Xihua Peak, the Sword Sage's disciples. This would be the first formal appearance of his disciples in the world in a century. Unlike what was written in the records, unlike the exaggerated tales recited by storytellers, and unlike the fanciful speculation of countless cultivators, this would be head-on combat with similar young prodigies, racing down a narrow path to determine who was superior. Yin Biyue felt heavy when he thought of this. He understood that victory or defeat was no longer his own. He carried the name of his unearned master. However, Liu Qishuang had her mind on things beyond the competition. She believed that now was the perfect time for Yin Biyue to travel. Sparring with others would broaden his horizons, show him how big the world was, and get him out of his narrow box. Perhaps the experience would lessen the impact of the incident with Luo Mingchen. Yin Biyue's innocent nature could be attributed to the uncomplicated environment of his upbringing. He had either studied behind the closed doors of the academy or trained in seclusion on the peak. The outside world might be tempestuous, but one could only grow from seeing the wickedness of the human heart firsthand. Shidi needed to grow. Liu Qishuang smiled faintly at Yin Biyue. Young people should have a sharp spirit. Yin Biyue forced himself not to grimace. If he were to add up all the years he'd spent in other transmigrations, that line would have turned into old freaks should have a sharp spirit. Assuming he understood why Yin Biyue had hesitated, Jin Yu said in encouragement, "Of the participants this year, only the one with the sobriquet Tempest Sword has some considerable skill. The others are of no concern. Fight your best. No one can win against you." Da Shining Xiang? Where's this confidence in me beaming from? I'm not you. I'm only in late-stage spirit concentration, Yin Biyue thought, baffled. The so-called Tempest Sword was a man named Zhong Shan, who was acclaimed throughout the southern continent. He had attained breakthrough at the age of 20 and was hailed as the best below small ascension. He was the genius deemed by the Qianglu sword sect as the most likely to attain sagehood in the next 300 years. But to Jin Yu, all he earned was some considerable skill. If the Qianglu sword sect found out about this, they might slit their own throats en masse in a fit of pique. Yin Biyue was still immensely grateful, of course, because his elder Shixiang had said so many words in one go just to encourage him. Yin Biyue cast a glance to the side, and sure enough, Duan Chongshen's eyes were practically on fire. His excited face exuded an energy that screamed, "Da Shixiang, say a few more words!" Yin Biyue groaned in his head, but he was mindful to keep his words serious. "Da Shixiang, our Shijie, please rest assured that I will do my utmost not to disgrace Xihua Peak's reputation at this tournament, and I will look after Wu Shidi." Liu Qishuang looked astounded by his promise. Even Jin Yu was slightly taken aback. Yin Biyue was confused. What? Did I say anything wrong? The first half was correct. The second half, I'm Duan Chongshen's Shixiang. My cultivation is higher. It's my job to look after him. Duan Chatterbox saluted him with cupped hands. Then I will be under your care, Shixiang. Yin Biyue's confusion only deepened. Duan Chongshen was about to tease him for the look on his face when Jin Yu's own turned grim. Luo Mingchen has come. Jin Yu controlled Xihua Peak's barrier. If he claimed that Luo Mingchen was there, the latter must have been at the foot of the mountain. The atmosphere turned heavy. What's he doing here? Liu Qishuang asked with a frown. Duan Chongshen stole a glimpse at Yin Biyue for his reaction. Maybe he's here to see Shixiang? Jun Yu was ready to deal a strike with his sword chi if Luo Mingchen dared take another step closer. But to everyone's surprise, Yin Biyue nodded. I shall meet with him, he said in a matter-of-fact tone. Shēng, Shijie, do you have anything else you wish to discuss? Yin Biyue didn't understand why everyone's face dropped at his response. What kind of villain wouldn't face the protagonist? I have to go. Know thy enemy is always the way to assess the protagonist's limits, so I learned how to push his buttons and get my ass kicked every time. Liu Qishuang appeared grim and Duan Chongshuan looked to be biting his tongue. In the end, Jin Yu made the decision for everyone. We shall go together. Thus, the disciples of Xihua Peak descended the mountain with as much pomp and fanfare as 4 people could manage. Luo Mingchen was alone. They overpowered him with numbers. Jin Yu was halfway to reaching Great Ascension, while Liu Qishuang was at Small Ascension. Luo Mingchen was only at the Breakthrough stage. They overpowered him in Cultivation Level 2. Yin Biyue finally figured it out. His peers had come with him as backup because they were worried about him. Unfortunately, there was a universal truth even more consistent than Newton's 3 laws. Those who back villains never reach a good end. He really needed to talk his innocent peers out of their decision. When he caught sight of Luo Mingchen, however, he found himself at a loss for words. The man before Yin Biyue was handsome and gentle as always. However, despite the vernal breeze of late spring blowing past him, he appeared emaciated by the withered desolation of autumn. His eyes were sunken and shadow-smeared, and his white Taoist robes flapped hollowly in the wind. They'd only been apart for a month, yet Luo Mingchen turned haggard. A world of difference from when they first met, when he was full of spirit and vigor. As he sensed the approaching party, he looked at Yin Biyue. His eyes were dull and his voice slightly hoarse. Yin Shidi. Luo Mingchen thought he had sorted himself out. Somehow, when he saw Yin Biyue before him, he found himself at a loss for words. As the chief disciple of the Zangya Mountains, Luo Mingchen handled the affairs of the sect on his master's behalf. He was the one who processed all the jade slips the other peaks transmitted to Shēng Hall before reporting the important matters to his master. This morning, he'd seen the jade slip Jin Yu had sent informing Shēng Hall that 2 disciples of Xihua Peak would be attending the flower plucking tournament. Only 2 disciples of Xihua Peak were below the small ascension state. Yin Biyue was one of them. The mere thought of how he had looked in the dungeon made Luo Mingchen's chest clench. Shifu, I will go to the flower plucking tournament on Mount Changming. You were supposed to go anyway. Why are you kneeling? I want to travel with Yin Shidi. Jinyangzi fell silent, the empty main hall echoing only with the drip-drop of the water clock. It was a long while before he waved his hand. Go on, then. Luo Mingchen performed a proper kowtow. Jin Yu and Liu Qishuang showed no signs of speaking, so Duan Chongshuan took a step forward. What can we do for you, Luo Shixiang? He was courteous and polite. No one could fault him for a lack of etiquette. Yin Biyue thought the critical role of Xihua Peak's diplomatic rep would suit Duan Chongshuan perfectly. I came because I wish to go to the flower plucking tournament alongside Yin Shidi, Luo Mingchen said, his eyes trained on Yin Biyue. Luo Mingchen was a well-spoken man. He'd once spoken eloquently at the Realms Symposium and had used his words to rally the hearts of the others during their plight in the secret realm. But right now, every word he uttered was strained. Not possible. Liu Qishuang rejected him coldly. Luo Mingchen paled, but he didn't know what to say to advance his cause. Instead, he slashed his finger with his spiritual powers. Scarlet beads of blood trickled from the cut and dripped onto the ground. He spoke again with careful emphasis. I, Luo Mingchen, swear before you now that I will obtain the 1,000-leaf lotus of Ming Lake for Shidi, or else I will never advance in my cultivation. A heartblood oath. Very few would make such a vow. Forcing out one's heartblood was an enormous strain on a cultivator. Never mind the consequences of breaking the oath. This was an oath that demanded absolute action at an immense cost. The color of Liu Qishuang's face changed drastically, and even Jun Yu's hardened expression cracked an inch. Duan Changshen snapped his fan shut and narrowed his eyes. Luo shi xiang. Those aren't words to be uttered carelessly. Luo Mingchen's lips had lost all color at this point. He stared pointedly at Yin Biyue, a glimmer of hope shining through the cloud of despair and anguish. Shidi, do you trust me? Everyone turned their heads to Yin Biyue and saw, with astonishment, that he nodded. Chapter 13. A semblance of warmth entered the air, melting Luo Mingchen's surprise and disbelief into a smile at last. No smile had graced his lips ever since he had parted with Yin Biyue at the dungeon, and now that it was blooming anew, the upward curve was a bit stiff and silly in a way he didn't realize. Thank you, Shidi. I will definitely do as I have vowed, Luo Mingchen said, flustered by Yin Biyue's unexpected response. Si, Shidi. Are you certain? Liu Qishuang asked Yin Biyue. Rest assured, Shijie, I know what I'm doing. Jin Yu said nothing but frowned, while Duan Chongshen grinned like he had a secret. Meanwhile, Yin Biyue wasn't as calm as he appeared. For some reason, the tech intern's voice echoed in his ears. These days, 8 out of 10 protagonists become villains for vengeance, and the 9th becomes a yandere that's totally beyond help. A sincere, righteous protagonist from a proper background is even rarer than a 3-legged toad, I'm telling you. What a time to remember the intern's words. If this bleeding heart protagonist's brain is that confused, then I'd rather have a villainized one who's beyond hope. At least the plot would make sense. Is exchange included in the package? Is it? He couldn't comprehend Luo Mingchen, but there was no reason to decline the protagonist's invitation. Besides, he was worried half to death about his villain-supporting peers. How could he unlock the Prevent Your Peers from Confronting the Protag achievement? When Luo Mingchen broke into a smile, Yin Biyue was struck by an epiphany. Okay, that was the script. The protagonist gave his everything to the heartless villain. They were BFFs in the first half, and the villain backstabbed the protagonist in the second half. What a hecking twisted plot! City folks knew how to play. Coming to this realization, Yin Biyue relaxed and felt immensely assured. The plot line was still within his grasp. His relief softened his dourness toward Luo Mingchen, and his eyes twinkled with mischief. Does Luo Shixiang have anything else to discuss? He asked. Luo Mingchen thought he saw the eternal snow upon Chen Yun Ridge melt into a gurgling spring that flowed into his heart. No, nothing else. Rest well, Shidi. I will take my leave now, he said, though for some reason he didn't move. It wasn't until Duan Chongshen cleared his throat that he turned around and left. The remaining 4 hung around to discuss travel plans for a bit until Yin Biyue also left. Turning to Duan Chongshen, Liu Qishuang crossed her arms. Keep an eye on Yin, Shidi. Don't let him be deceived. Although anyone with eyes can see Luo Mingchen is deeply in love with Shidi, he tried to force himself on him after all. We can't just hand Shidi over to him. Duan Chongshen turned serious at once, his usual frivolity gone. Of course, Shijie. It goes without saying. Liu Qishuang couldn't relax when Yin Biyue told her not to worry. But when Duan Chongshen said it, she knew Luo Mingchen wouldn't be able to get his way so easily. Jin Yu didn't say anything, but he had the same opinion. Thus, the matter was settled. Since his trip to the academy, Yin Biyue had found a way to practice his sword, and he'd been training day and night without daring to slack for a second. He felt he could see the outlines of the threshold for the breakthrough state. If only the minutes would slow down so he could improve his proficiency and further cement his cultivation level. Yet a month passed in the blink of an eye, and the time had come for him to depart. The day before his departure, he decided to pay a visit to Jun Yu and Liu Qishuang to bid them farewell. Jun Yu was not in the first courtyard. Guided by the presence of his majestic sword chi, Yin Biyue came to the precipice behind the residence where Jun Yu was practicing the sword, using a freshly snapped, withered branch. When Yin Biyue was about 100 feet away, he could tell Jin Yu was in the zone, immersed in the sword intent, so he stopped in his tracks to avoid disturbing him. In the next second, an enormous pressure, as monumental as a mountain, bore down on Yin Biyue with suffocating strength. He summoned his vital qi to ward off the sword qi and simultaneously concentrated on Jin Yu to observe his movements. Jin Yu was practicing a sword style, Chongshan Minor, that had been created by the sword sage. He stood at the edge of the peak, beholding the boundless green mountains and borrowing their momentum. It was similar to Yin Biyue practicing beside the cold pool and drawing water to refine the momentum of his own sword, Yihu. The state of mind, the method of cultivation, the sword technique, and the force behind it resonated with the universe to allow the wielder to move at will, as if guided in perfect harmony with the cosmos. The morning breeze swept away the drifting mist below the cliff, allowing the rays of sun to gild the distant mountains. Millions of intertwining threads of gold gathered upon Jin Yu's withered branch to form a river that surged forward, splitting mountains and rocks to rush through the meadows and hills for 10,000 miles, until it at last merged without a sound into the great sea. Jin Yu withdrew his makeshift sword and stopped. Still standing at the precipice, his black robes and hair dancing in the wind, he nodded at Yin Biyue. There hadn't been any golden rays or rivers, nor were there any meadows or hills or seas. All that stood in reality were the boundless green mountains, resilient and silent. All he saw was but an image conjured by the sword intent. Yin Biyue returned to his senses. He approached and bowed. "Forgive me for the disturbance, Shēng." To his surprise, Jin Yu addressed him directly. "How was it?" Yin Biyue paused before he realized Jin Yu was asking him what he thought of the sword style. He considered his answer. "You drew great momentum from the mountain using the Chongshan Minor technique. The sword brimmed with the mountain's power, yet it did not overflow. You manipulated it easily and at will. I imagine the true meaning contained within is already clear to you, Shēng." It wasn't obsequious praise. Jin Yu's sword was superb. Even with a withered branch, and without his vital qi, the sword qi itself was enough to communicate the danger it could pose to Yin Biyue. This was the gap in their cultivation level, the gap in their art of the sword. However, Jin Yu shook his head. "Every day I swing the sword 63,000 times, yet I have not progressed in 3 years." Yin Biyue realized Jin Yu was talking to him about training. It made sense. They were the only two on Xihua Peak who practiced the sword. Though the gap in their skill levels was significant, Jin Yu must have thought highly of him to express his self-doubt. The minor flaw in the sword of a cultivator halfway to great ascension was not going to be detected by a cultivator in the spirit concentration state. However, Yin Biyue had his lived experience to draw from. Moreover, he already suspected the cause of Jin Yu's bottleneck. After Deng Chongshen said that their Shishang hadn't used Chunshen Xiao in his fight against the Great Ascension cultivator, Yin Biyue had been thinking about it. Now that the opportunity presented itself, he voiced his question bluntly. "Why do you not use Chunshen Xiao when you practice Dashishang?" "I have not yet attained Great Ascension. I am unworthy of wielding it," Jin Yu replied without hesitation. Yin Biyue knew for certain what the problem was now. His peers had protected him on several occasions, yet he hadn't had the chance to repay them. Now, even though he knew what he was about to say risked overstepping, he decided to speak his mind. He met Jin Yu's eyes firmly. "My cultivation level is low, but I personally believe a sword is a sword. Flowers, branches, and grass are not swords. Axes, hooks, and pronged spears are not swords. Therefore, it is only sword practice when one is holding a sword." Jin Yu furrowed his brows. "What is the meaning of a sword if it cannot be wielded?" Yin Biyue continued. "To be stored inside and hung on a wall as a decoration?" When Jin Yu remained silent, Yin Biyue decided to push his luck. The way I see it, Qun Shan Xiao is no doubt an excellent sword, but if it is kept inside a case, it is not a divine weapon, but a shackle. It's holding you back. His words struck Jin Yu's heart like a sword itself, hard enough to break him out of his fog. Jin Yu's eyes flashed, and a sharp whirlwind of stunning sword qi burst out of him. Yin Biyue's stomach churned, even though he pushed his vital qi to the limit to shield himself. Only a moment later, however, Jin Yu's riotous energy quieted to the stillness of a calm sea. Da Shixiao, have you ever considered that Shifu gave you the sword because no one else in this world was worthy to wield it except for you? Jin Yu brushed his sleeves gently, as if he had dusted away an imperceptible grain of dust, and the confusion that had oppressed him for years was dispelled along with it. Thank you, Shidi, he said with great solemnity. Yin Biyue lowered his head. Do not mention it. When Jin Yu saluted him nonetheless, he frantically turned to avoid the bow. Still dazed from his enlightenment, Jin Yu turned to watch the mountains in the distance. Yin Biyue bade him farewell and left to descend through the forest alone. He knew Jin Yu had just broken through the obstacle in his mind and needed to be left alone to collect his thoughts. Yin Biyue had perceived Jin Yu's hurdle not because he was more of an expert, but because those too close to a problem often couldn't see it clearly. Moreover, everyone believed Jin Yu to be strong and none would imagine him stuck. Even when then Changshen spoke of Jin Yu fighting without Chun Shan Shao, his praise was full of awe. Jin Yu was strong indeed, but the burden on his shoulders was too heavy. The burden of his reputation as the Sword Sage's chief disciple, the burden of an elder Shixiang's duty, and heaviest of all, the burden that Xihua, Peak, and the rest of the Zangya sect were the bastion of peace in the realm. His responsibilities did not stop at wielding Chun Shan Shao. The world was not as peaceful as it seemed. The Sword Sage had been gone for a long time, and malicious tongues were spreading the rumor that the Sword Sage was no longer in this world. The Zangya Mountains did not have a second sage. If the Sword Sage was one day truly gone, Zangya's strongest fighter, Jin Yu, might have to face multiple second sages. Yin Biyue's heart grew heavy at this thought. If he knew this, many others must as well, whether they be in the light or the shadows. In fact, some might have already divined a multitude of possibilities. Some, like Headmaster Xiansheng. That's all for this time. Questions and suggestions are welcome in the comments. Join me again next time. Thanks for watching.